Afternoon, everyone. I hope you recovered from lunch. I'll blather a bit while you're sitting down. Just quickly to introduce myself, my name is Peter Jukes. I got into this journalism business only fairly recently, later on in my 50s, mainly due to phone hacking and media barons using compromising material, compromat. And in the last 2 years, thanks to these people to my left, we've seen this go viral. I mean, I always felt that the phone hacking trial, which I sat through, should be a warning to people, but I'm imagining there are some digital campaigners, I won't mention defunct companies like Cambridge Analytica, who watched the phone hacking trial and thought, well, you can subvert data, you can blackmail politicians. What a brilliant business model. Let's put it online and use it throughout the world. So for the last 2 years, I've been watching, in retrospect, with some great journalists to my left, the rubble of the Brexit vote, not just its legitimacy, but its legality. And it's very awkward. It's awkward for some people here to go back and question the legality of that vote. So we're not going to go into lots of detail about what we think has been revealed about dark money, dark data, and dark arts in Brexit. The historical record is there. It's been amply compiled by, among some people who can't be here, James Patrick on Byline has written about Russian influence for the last 2 years. Adam Ramsay, Peter Gagan, and May Fitzgerald and Jim Cusick have documented and pushed all kinds of amazing cases of DUP dark money, Leave EU overspending, all things which without their journalism would have not been referred to the Electoral Commission. Nick Cohen, ever since the moment of Brexit, he was the first person who sort of opened my eyes to this. Brexit was the victory of the punditocracy. Who were the vote leave leaders? There were Michael Gove and Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson famously made his career in Brussels, the Telegraph, making up lies about the EU. Michael Gove, very close to Rupert Murdoch, in fact, interviews Donald Trump, with Murdoch forcing him to take notes. We have the victory of the punditocracy, and Nick Cohen has excoriated them, and he's brilliant, and we'll be talking about this, about the BBC and how their remit to balance truth against lies, the remit for balance has left them open to being gamed, or even worse, by dark forces or lying forces around Brexit in Europe. And of course, Carole Cadwalladr, who in the last 3 years has exposed 3 of the biggest scandals in British electoral history.
I think they like you.
Juke. Carole hates that. She really hates it. Stop doing it. She's one of the most sharing and modest people I know, and that's bigging her up anymore. I won't say anything more about that. But let's remember what she exposed beginning 2 years ago. Cambridge Analytica. I mean, she first wrote this great essay, exactly 2 years ago, about Robert Mercer and Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon still floating around the edges of British political circles, still saying Tommy Robinson is the backbone of Britain, consulting with Gove, Rees-Mogg. So she exposed that, and then this time, well, soon to be this time last year, Cambridge Analytica, Facebook. I mean, not completely on her own. She had a brilliant whistleblower, Chris Wiley, 150 billion knocked off the share price of Facebook, because she exposed how they'd hacked us, our data had been hacked through companies allied with Cambridge Analytica, and we'd been gamed by dark ads. She's also exposed the vote leave scandal with Shamir Sani, massive overspend, illegal overspend of over £600,000, all spent in the last week, millions of ads bought on Facebook with illegal money. And finally, I had a little bit, to help her a little bit on this, Arron Banks and the Russian embassy. So all 3 stories are amazing. We're not going to go into huge detail about those stories. I just urge you to read the work, because we have been asked to look at how we secure democracy in the future after these scandals. Dark money, dark data, dark arts. How, if there's to be another referendum vote, if there's to be another general election, we protect ourselves. So first I'm going to start with Adam on the subject of dark money. Just briefly tell us what you've discovered and how we might combat it.
Sure. So I think the kind of bottom line for me is that if you turn your country into the world's biggest money laundry, then don't be surprised if dark money ends up in your politics. And so the first story for us that we came across was how we showed that the DUP got a £435,000 donation for their Brexit campaign and laundered that into the campaign from we still don't know where. We know it came via a guy called Richard Cook, who we've shown, including in the last week, has a long track record of misleading regulators, of lying to officials, and of breaking various laws. And yet, as far as we can tell, the only thing the Electoral Commission has done to investigate this money is ask Richard Cook where it came from and then believe his answer. We working with various other people, and Carole's done work on this too, we showed that there's no way that Aaron Banks could afford the amount of money he claims he gave to the Brexit campaign. So Carole and I were chatting just now, and we're still not entirely clear what it is he claims, but by my sums, it's about £15 million we think he claims to have given to the Leave campaign, by far the biggest donation in British political history. We know that that money is supposed to have come through Gibraltar. It looks like it was from a company that was propped up by another firm in the Isle of Man. He worked with people who, a guy called Alan Halsall, who's been arrested by the Gibraltarian police. He's had trouble with the authorities in Malta, in Jersey, in Kitts and Nevis. It's fair to say that these guys have a long track record of working in secrecy areas and overseas territories and are experts in hiding money and hiding where it's come from.
Just to interrupt you briefly, and it has now been found by the Electoral Commission, is that not right, that Aaron Banks was not a permissible donor, i.e. they do not believe, they suspect that the money did not come from a UK citizen. It is illegal for a foreign citizen to donate to British elections. Is that right?
That is potentially right, but here's the thing. The Electoral Commission had to be put under a huge amount of pressure at every step to seriously investigate any of these questions, because you don't get to be the world's biggest money launderer if your officials ask serious questions. And then when the Electoral Commission did finally find that, they finally found that they'd broken the law, and they referred them to the police. I just put in my diary, I scrolled through a few months, and I was like, ask police what they've done, because obviously the police aren't going to do anything. You don't get to be the world's biggest money launderer if you have police who investigate financial crime. If you talk to the main people investigating the Italian mafia, they describe Britain as the most corrupt country on earth because you follow the money, you get to London, and the Met say, no, look, they ticked the box that said it wasn't criminal, so it's fine. And so we can't rely on the police to police a future referendum either. And I suppose, for me, that means that the bottom line about a 6-month question, if we have a referendum coming up, is that we have a, kind of slightly depressing answer to the question, which is we have to invest in journalism. Traditional journalism has been going through a crisis because the advertising model has gone. One of the things that's shocked me is that, other than Carole and a couple of other people, very few journalists in the traditional media have spent their time looking at this. And that's not because they're bad people who don't want to do their jobs. It's because there's no resource for it. And so what this, for me, a lot of this is a symptom of a crisis in journalism, which we need to resolve by paying for journalism. And I would say that, but I think, you all chipping in to pay for the kind of investigative journalism you want is the only way we're going to get through a future referendum without this kind of crisis. But I think we also need to understand that all of our stories show something much more important about Brexit, which is that Brexit is just one symptom of a constitutional crisis as deep as the Atlantic Trench. And in the long term, in the medium term, what we need to do is have a proper constitutional convention and become a modern democracy. And until we do that, we're never going to be able to solve these problems.
So moving beyond these sort of national problems of money laundering and our constitution, Carole, could you maybe address the big black box in the room, the tech companies? And you used to get a lot of trouble when you first broke the Cambridge Analytica story from tech bros who said you didn't understand how tech works. Now, you revealed something about Facebook, social media. What do you, can you explain what you discovered and how, if anything, can be done to combat it?
Well, I was thinking on the way here that it's 2 years, isn't it, since the previous convention, and I've spent that entire time looking at this subject. And 2 years ago, when I came to the convention, I talked about I talked mostly about Google there and the results that we'd found. And I said that it was said, I don't know how we hold power to account. And I said that we were trying, but it wasn't possible. And so over the last 2 years, it's that, you know, we, Open Democracy, the network of people, we have laid out this evidence, and nothing has been done about it. It is not possible to hold power to account in Britain. And part of that responsibility lies with the tech giants. It is not possible to hold Facebook to account. And this is the thing which I just find galling and frustrating and ridiculous. And if there is a second referendum, then there is absolutely no way that we should allow advertising on Facebook, because it is shown that it is beyond rule of law. It is beyond our rule of law. It refuses to answer to our lawmakers, and it has facilitated crimes, and it is refusing to give us the evidence of those crimes. And this is beyond politics. It's beyond left or right. It's about our national security, apart from anything else. So, yes, sorry.
Isn't that right?
Was that the question? Was that the answer? I don't know.
Just so we can briefly touch on the question of Russian influence, and we know about Russian influence in the Trump campaign. Remember Steve Bannon, lots of similar figures involved in Brexit, because Facebook were forced to give up those accounts. But we have no clue except inference on Twitter and looking at some of the accounts, what they actually did in Brexit. They refused to come to Parliament, doesn't he? He refuses to answer questions.
It's this extraordinary situation, which is that in the United States, there is this incredible investigations, multiple ones, which are laying out forensic detail, the way that the social media platforms were subverted by this hostile foreign power. And those same social media platforms were the medium through which our politics is perpetrated and through which the referendum was fought. And at exactly the same time, with exactly the same data companies involved, with exactly the same individuals. We know it was it was just 200 yards from where we're sitting now that I sat in that pret-a-manger just down the street with Andy Wigmore, where he told me how closely they worked with the Trump campaign. They told me that they worked together because they had the same ends. He told me sitting there that Brexit was the petri dish for Trump. And yet we're in sort of national denial about these links. And, sorry, I forgot what my point was there.
No, but before I go to Nick briefly, one reason, one thing to protect us would be something like a Mueller. The NCA have, after Carole actually put a placard outside the NCA, maybe coincidental, have opened an investigation into Banks' funding. But it's very secretive. We have no idea when they'll report. So before any other referendum, we may discover after the event there was the illegality. We don't know now. But would that be one? Would that reassure you a bit if there was a more open police enforcement or public inquiry into these matters?
Well, it's just what Adam says. It's that the thing for me, which has been this whole thing about doing this story, is that before I started accidentally on this story, I believed that we lived in a modern democracy, that we had rule of law, that we were a beacon to the rest of the world, that we had the mother of all parliaments. And the way that the scales have sort of fallen away from my eyes, and the level of corruption and the involvement of all parties and the corrupting influence of foreign money in all of this is just so depressing. I'm sorry.
Well, let's cheer ourselves up a bit and go to Nick. Because one thing we can control, or should be able to control, which is, as license payers, is the BBC. I followed Nick's work for years, and he's been brilliant on censorship. But something happened, I think a lot of BBC correspondents would agree, in the Brexit campaign 2 years ago. Firstly, the idea of balance was gained. that you had lots of lies told, reported on the BBC, obviously the famous bus, and the BBC felt it should represent points of view, not report the truth, not, flat Earth versus round Earth, rather than decide the rotundity of the Earth, they decided to put both points of view. Nick, did you notice that? Do you think there's some flaw in the thinking of the BBC or some structural problem there? And how do we stop them doing it again if there's another referendum?
I think there is, and it's as you laid out. I think it's a wider flaw, though, across British institutions, which is, if you like, a bias against opposition. I think the BBC has a problem. We're near Westminster Abbey. It is very like the Anglican Church. On the one hand, the Anglican Church is there to spread Christ's gospel. On the other, though, it's a national church, it's a state church, it's got to represent the country, and the two often conflict. The BBC has the same. On the one hand, the BBC should do journalism. And good journalism isn't hard. You follow stories wherever you take it, you tell the truth, and you are not frightened. Let justice come though the heavens fall. If you cause trouble, you cause trouble. It's not that, the basics of good journalism are not hard, but then it thinks it has to, the nation has decided on Brexit, it can't follow all the stuff that Carole and Adam's done.
And they had it. They were going to follow.
No,
Panorama was going to do a documentary.
They were giving it all on the plate. And that real journalists, when you're given a taste, a portion of a world exclusive, a story that wipes, whatever it was, 90 billion off Facebook's share price, you take it. There's something else gone wrong. You are going to get, if there is a second referendum, and I think, who knows? It's like the old saying in Hollywood, William Goldman, no one knows anything. All I would say, it's gone from being an idea way out, so extreme, so fanciful, no one who was serious or part of respectable society took it serious, to right in there. Theresa May could call one in a couple of weeks. She could say, I've lost my Brexit plan, my premiership's a disaster, I'm going to call a referendum on this. You're going to get this all again, but it will be different. I think it's important that we talk about, because you said this at the beginning, how we can do better next time, if there is a next time. And what you're going to get, you won't get any investigative journalism, you get the whole time is you ladies and gentlemen, the people made a decision. You couldn't accept it, and the country is pushed into division, into protest, into family member against family member, all over again because of you. This is a very, very effective argument, and one that needs to be taken very, very seriously. It's worked in Scotland when nationalists thought, well, the SNP's being re-elected again, we can have a second independence referendum, and lots of people, including people who voted to leave the United Kingdom, said, nah. We had the vote, you lost, accept it. The point that has to be emphasized to the BBC, to everyone, because it's a point that is useful because it also happens to be true, is this has happened because of the Brexit supporters of Brexit. They are the establishment. They are in power. They are in control. They had it all. And they've fallen out among themselves, going back to things that aren't reported. And shamefully, I didn't report it at the time. Dominic Cummings, right at the start of all of this, says, we're not going to issue a manifesto. We're not going to tell people what voting leave means, because we don't agree among ourselves. I mean, what a thing. Imagine if the Irish had an abortion referendum, and the Irish government said, you're going to legalise abortion, but we're not going to say what that means. Well, it means 3 weeks, 5 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever. Morning after pill, we're not going to tell you. So they never agreed among themselves. They could have had Brexit. They could still have Brexit if they all just stuck together. They'd won the vote. They had it all. They had the power. It is their divisions, their fanaticism, their inability to build a new consensus, which will cause a second referendum. I think it's absolutely vital that people emphasise that.
And are you optimistic that because of the process we've been through and the 14 million different varieties of leave that the public has somehow discovered this through BBC reporting, through general reporting, or do you think it will just create more division, Ramona's, second bite of the cherry, going back till you get the result you want?
Well, that's why I said you have. been a fascinating thing which has been around a lot longer than Trump and Johnson and Gove and all these people, of the anti-elitism of the elite, how people in power always pose as we're the outsider, we're the rebels, we're the ones standing up for the little guy, and you are the elite. Well, I mean, one good definition of the elite is who's got the power. Supporters of Brexit control the Labour Party and the Tory Party. They control the government and the opposition. And although I've given the BBC a good kicking, I would say that both the BBC and other broadcasters face a real difficulty in that they have balance. They have to have a certain number of Labour, Lib Dem, SNP. They have to have actual ratios and schedules, you know, like a recipe where they have to get a certain number of each on. And if the official opposition is not in Westminster and in the studios saying, hold on a second, sorry, the man who made the biggest donation in British financial history to Leave.eu, one, has no money. Carole and I did an event once where I called him a British oligarch, and the gentleman at the back of the audience slapped me down very firmly, said, he's not an oligarch, he's a failed oligarch married to a Russian prostitute. And I had to back down in the face of his superior wisdom. If the opposition is not doing this, is not saying, well, you know, hold on a second, what about our banks? What about the Russian ambassador offering gold mines? Yeah. What about Vote Leave having police investigations, Electoral Commission findings against them? They're too timid, they're too lacking in journalistic spirit to raise them themselves, and in some ways they would say if they were here, it's not our job to raise it ourselves.
Well, then it's your job. I'm going to open the floor to questions now, and where people put their hands up and the mic moves around, I'll prattle on a little bit. So can we move the microphone to the back for once, that gentleman over there? I was told by, he's got his hands up on the mic, your far left, far right of mine, that a friend of mine was on Question Time, last Dimbleby one, and he wore a pink shirt and a blue jacket deliberately. And Dimbleby went, the guy in the blue shirt, the pink shirt and the blue jacket. And he got to berate somebody over Brexit. You know, I'm noticing on Twitter and on various other social media, you can hold them to account. Has the gentleman got the microphone there? Yes, that's you over there. Oh.
Can any of the panel offer us an update on any of the investigations?
Okay, that's one question. Second question, update on investigation. Second question, sir. It's just behind you. The mic's just behind you. Okay.
So I was just thinking, going back to the question from the gentleman down there earlier about what we can do as people, ordinary citizens, in terms of organizing,
yeah, can we make this
as opposed to MPs. And then I was thinking about the BBC, and then I was thinking about the fact that the BBC is the only media outlet that is actually influenceable in a proper way. And the fact that I receive at least 3 emails a day from all the organizations that are anti-Brexit. How would it be that if all of us, for a start, listened to the day program World at One and so forth, and wrote every single day to the BBC to complain when Brexiteers come on unanswered on their programs?
Brilliant, thank you. And just one third question. Can we just have this, and the purple dress, the woman, lady, just 3 rows from back in the central row, please. With the white hair. There she is, with her hand up. So I'm going to fill in while this happens. It's a big hall, lots of people. So we want you to think about updates, writing in, and the third question?
Given that there is this conspiracy of silence about all of this, what practical steps can we take? Do we have a manifesto to actually try and fix our democracy?
Okay, wider question about a manifesto. I don't know who wants to talk about, what updates do you have, Carole?
I mean, so for example, to take one example, which was that this Adam, as he said, so Open Democracy, I think was it Jim Cusack, discovered this thing, which is the Metropolitan Police. So the Electoral Commission referred Leave EU to the police back in May, and then it referred Vote Leave to the police in July. And then I think it was in October that you discovered that the police hadn't actually collected the files from the Electoral Commission for 5 months. So they hadn't even begun to investigate. And so we sort of tried to kick up about that, and they both just blamed each other. And I was just sent 2 days ago, a member of the London Assembly had written to the Met Police, and they had squarely blamed it on the Electoral Commission, which is interesting because the Electoral Commission told us very squarely that it was the fault of the Met Police. So, I mean, it's just this insane situation, which is we know that it's such a political hot potato. Nobody wants to investigate this. They're trying to kick it down the road. And so we've got these, incredibly serious crimes which are being investigated. There's those by the Met Police, there's the ones by the National Crime Agency. But we aren't going to have the results of those before we leave Europe. I mean, it's very unlikely. So
there are 9 or 11 investigations. I remember they have a lot of initials because MPS, Financial Services Authority, I think the SFO, that hasn't been confirmed, and the NCA.
Yeah. But this isn't, I suppose the point about it is it doesn't matter in a sense because the law has no role here. This is a political issue, and this is where it is up to the political parties, where it's up to the opposition to be trying to hold the government to account, to getting the answers from this, and that's what's not happening.
And we've had some updates over the last month or so on the DUP donation I mentioned. So just to kind of summarize very quickly, the DUP got this secret donation, which initially wasn't, in the public domain at all. We managed to show that the guy that had come via had set up a company in 2013 with the former head of the Saudi intelligence service and a guy involved in running hundreds of Kalashnikovs to former Hindu terrorists in West Bengal in 1995. And then at the end of last month, because of a legal challenge trying to get the Electoral Commission to properly investigate this, because they've always said it's above board, it turned out that basically the Electoral Commission, who'd always said, we know where the money comes from, it's fine. All they'd ever done, as I mentioned before, is ask Richard Cook, the guy that came via, where it was from, and then believed him. So that was kind of, for me, quite shocking. And then last week, my colleague Peter Gagan, who sat just there, wrote another big piece about Richard Cook, which he'd been investigating for the last few months, which revealed a whole set of pretty shocking kind of deceptions where, like, for example, he'd shipped a whole lot of waste tire material, hundreds of tons, to India, and he claimed to have the certificates to show what it was because he'd got this document, which was in fact produced by another one of his companies with its own headed paper, Grapevine Networking Limited, which is his recruitment company and has no business in signing off documents for... So I suppose the point is, that it continues to be the case that these guys are, clearly fraudsters in a sense. And today, we're going to be breaking the story, that Peter again is breaking the story, that a whole load of MPs have just written to the Electoral Commission demanding that they reopen that investigation. So we're publishing that story later today.
So, Nick, if you want to... Well, you've witnessed these things over the decades, dare I say. Is a manifesto...
Well made.
Me too. A manifesto, or people writing to the BBC, people writing to the Electoral Commission, or writing to the NCA, is that a good route of protest? Them holding their public officials to account?
It is. And so, look, I think everyone's being a bit too down in the dumps here, all these things, what can we do, blah, blah, blah. Do you mind if I do a little poll? How many people in here voted Labour at the last election? Okay. How many people voted Labour at the last election but don't want to admit it in public? That's even more. Look, have you made very, very clear to the Labour Party, to your local MP, you've got a Labour MP, if you carry on with all this faffing about, with this absurd, with this absolute lie of Lexit, that, you're not getting my vote again. You're not getting my vote again. I'm waiting for the moment when the Greens and the Lib Dems start taking off from the polls. So there's that. Second, there could very well be a second referendum. There could very well be another campaign. It's gone from the fringe to the mainstream, as so many things have done in the past 5 years. From Trump to Corbyn to all these things, with astonishing speed, ideas that people dismissed as complete fantasy. That if you're a respectable commentator, you say, well, of course there can be a second referendum. People say, won't happen, can't happen. Well, now they're suddenly all saying it may well happen. If that does, do you mind if I say something which is a bit hard? Because I agree with everything, I'm sure, everything that Caroline, Lucas, and everything that said about a new constitution, all of that, that's fine. I don't think Carole was there, I finally, after all these years, got invited to a meeting of the Metropolitan Liberal elite. And I actually said to them, that people are organising Remain campaigns, what are people prepared to give up to win? And I asked everyone around the table to just give up one thing in order to win enough referendum. I said, well, Brexit, the problem with Brexit, the reason why it's leading us into such a cul-de-sac is it solves none of our country's problems, then adds some new ones just for fun, to paraphrase Philip Larkin. For most people, including a lot of people who voted Remain, incidentally, they will come back and say, Peter, it does control immigration. So what are you going to say on immigration? And at this meeting, I said, well, are you going to say, well, okay, we'll have free movement in Europe, but we'll have tighter immigration controls for the rest of the world? Oh, no, Nick, we can't say that, that's racist. Okay? Are you going to say we'll have identity cards, so to counter public concern about people coming in the country and accessing services? No, we can't do that. And you've got to start thinking about, if there's a second campaign, first of all, you've got to throw all the onus onto the right, which is the elite, which is the new establishment, which has pushed this country into a wholly unnecessary crisis, a crisis with no benefits. And second, you've got to start thinking, what do I have to say to get out of my comfort zone? What can I give up without destroying my principles, destroying my raison d'etre? Sorry.
Unfortunately, time's up, and I have one last request of all of you to cheer Carole up. Don't give her huge applause. Go, read the articles, push all these bodies, make sure the BBC and Andrew Neil, maybe even get her on the BBC for once, and push all those bodies who should be holding our electoral strategy, our electoral system, keeping it pure, keeping it honest, and just keep on activating for that. And meanwhile, thanks to the panel.